Running Scared by Lynn Cook, Chapter 10. Lee walked through customs to the sight of Julie waving her arms ecstatically and smiling like a Cheshire cat. She threw her arms around Lee as though they were long-lost lovers. "It seems like years since I've seen you." Lee hugged her back. "I missed you too, Julie." Julie drew back and looked at her. "Why aren't you tanned?" Lee laughed. "I haven't been on holiday. I've been working. And for your information, it's absolutely freezing in New York right now." Julie smirked. "That's some consolation for me, I suppose. Come on, I'll show you where I parked." They started to make their way through the terminal. "I didn't know you were picking me up. I'm impressed you managed to keep it quiet." "Don't be. I only found out myself last night from June, with strict instructions from God Almighty, apparently." Once they were in the car Julie had been given, she bombarded Lee with questions, not believing the emails for a second. Had she met any men? What clubs did she go to? Were all Americans rich and handsome? By the time they got home, Lee had told her again and again it was just work, work, and more work. "So then tell me at least what it was like working so closely with God Almighty. Was he a total wanker?" "He was okay." "Stop being so on the fence all the time. You can't stand him any more than I can, so why won't you just admit it?" Lee shook her head. "That's not true." "Yes, it is. Tell me the truth. I bet he nearly bored the pants off of you." Lee had to bite her lip as the thought struck her that her pants very nearly did come off, but it certainly didn't have anything to do with boredom. "As I said, he was okay." Julie looked unconvinced. "He's very good at what he does, Julie, and knows his business inside and out." "Yeah, business, but that's all you can say about him. He doesn't have a life. Now you've spent some time with him, don't you agree with me that he might be gay?" "No, I don't." Lee had no intention of justifying her answer. Julie was steadfast. "I do. Did I ever tell you about the time when a girl from the press office got so pissed she made a pass at him? He turned her down cold, and she was a real stunner." She let out a deep breath. "Yeah, definitely gay." "Perhaps she wasn't his type," Lee defended, though she wasn't sure why. Julie looked amazed. "What's type got to do with it when you're pissed and someone hot is laying it on a plate? We aren't all looking for thunderbolts and lightning, you know." Lee raised her eyebrows. "And that's what you think I'm looking for, thunderbolts and lightning? Well, you certainly aren't interested in casual, so you must be looking for serious." "For your information, Miss Taylor, I've been there and done that, and it's not something I wish to repeat for a while." "You've never told me that before." "It's not something I like to talk about, and no, that's not an invitation to talk about it now. And as much as I love the surprise of you coming to pick me up, and yes, I have missed you terribly, I'm absolutely exhausted. So with all the love in the world, my darling, would you mind awfully pissing off so I can get some sleep?" She smiled. After a little more probing from Julie, just to make sure she hadn't missed anything, she finally left Lee alone. It was only 5 in the afternoon by her body clock, but she dearly wanted to avoid jet lag if she possibly could, so went to bed anyway. As she lay there, with sleep so far out of her reach, she couldn't help but be pleased with what Julie had told her about Greg turning down the other girl. It made her happy to know that he wasn't some sex maniac looking for notches on his bedpost. She tried not to think about it as she tossed and turned all night. Lee felt like she had been away for months when she walked into the office the following morning. First on her agenda was to see June, to get the things she would need for Greg. They warmly embraced, and Lee told her all about the trip, the people she had met, and the work she had been doing. "You haven't mentioned Greg yet, so how did the two of you get on?" June asked. Lee cleared her throat. "Fine." "Really? So not as bad as you first thought, then?" "To be honest, June, I think I just sort of got used to him." "Well, he was very pleased with you, and how efficiently you worked. I think he was a little surprised at how the more work you had to do, the happier you seemed." "He works hard himself, though." "Indeed," June agreed. "Perhaps a little too hard, but that's just Greg. That's who he is." Lee nodded. "That's who he is, all right." June smiled. "I'm glad the two of you got on. I was a little afraid he might have driven you away." "I know. I was there, remember, when I told him to tell you that it had been a pleasure to work for him?" "I remember. I told him I thought you lied beautifully, and he said you did everything that way. So you see, you were given the seal of approval from the horse's mouth." Lee smiled and changed the subject. 1 week later, with many telephone conversations and emails with Greg under her belt, she had finished all she had to do for him and was back in research. Simple it was, busy it was, but now she just found it all so boring. 3 weeks later, Lee was sat at her desk at 6 p.m. on a Friday night, and Paul walked in to see her. "Burning the midnight oil again, I see, gorgeous?" Lee greeted him with a smile. "Where else would I be on a Friday night, handsome? Because don't go confusing me with all those other people that have that thing called a life." "Okay, so let's do something about that. How about we get 2 or 3 bottles of champagne, a box of Cocoa Pops, then go back to my place and make love all weekend?" Lee looked confused. "Why would we need the Cocoa Pops?" Paul smiled. "I like Cocoa Pops." Lee laughed. "I have to say, it's a tough call. On the one hand, I have the latest reports on how air conditioning units are affecting the ozone layer. And on the other hand, I have a handsome, desirable champagne and Cocoa Pops dilemma. But I have to say, you have no idea how turned on I get by air conditioning units." She rested her elbows on the desk and put her chin in her hands. Paul leant against the desk towards her. "But did you know that I can also run hot and cold at several different speeds?" "But are you turbo boosted?" she drawled. "That's what the champagne is for." Lee giggled as Paul kissed the tip of her nose, and then they heard someone clear their throat, and they both turned to see Greg standing in the doorway. "I do hope I'm not interrupting anything. I could always come back at a more convenient time." The look on his face and his tone of voice told them both he had no intentions of going anywhere. "No, that's fine." Paul straightened up. "I was just leaving, Greg." He turned back to Lee and rolled his eyes. "I'll see you later, Lee." Then he left the room. Greg looked at Lee in silence for a couple of seconds, obviously coming to all of the wrong conclusions over what he had just seen and heard. But Lee didn't care. Officially, she was off the clock, so this was her time. She leant back in her chair. "When did you get back?" "Today." "Good flight?" He finally entered the room and sat on the edge of her desk. "There's never anything good about flying, Lee. It's long, uncomfortable, and boring. But unfortunately, it's the quickest way to travel." Well, welcome back, Mr. Hyde, Lee thought. Why did she even bother? "How are you finding things, being back in here, I mean?" "Fine." "Really?" "I don't really understand the question, Greg." "Well, it's quite simple. I want to know if you're bored. I don't think we're using you to your fullest potential, but I wouldn't want to push you if you didn't think you were ready." "What did you have in mind?" She was intrigued. "Top floor, not a consultant yet, but not an assistant either. It would fall somewhere in between. But should that pan out, and I don't see why it wouldn't, it would put you next in line for a consultant's position." Lee was struck dumb. "Well," he said impatiently, "are you interested or not?" She sat bolt upright. "Oh, yes, very interested." "Good. I'll see June on Monday." He pushed off her desk and walked away, then turned at the door. "I do hope I haven't ruined any of your weekend plans. You may still catch him if you hurry." He always had to go out with a snide remark, she thought. She smiled sweetly. "Don't worry, Greg. You haven't ruined anything for me." He looked at her for a second. "No, I don't suppose for 1 second that I have." He turned and walked away.